Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first keynote address of VWBPE 2016. Bronwyn Stuckey is a self-described warrior princess and a consultant specialist in gameplay, gamification, communities of practice, and learning communities. Bronwyn has been engaged in educational community and games in learning development for the past 15 years. She has worked to explore virtual worlds, games and learning, and how we can cultivate identity, agency, citizenship, leadership, and community for students and teachers. Since leaving lecturing and learning design in the higher education sector, her research, consultation, and design have been in gamification and game-inspired designs for classroom contexts in professional learning and communities of practice. She is a current postdoctoral research fellow of the Arizona State University Center for Games and Impact and independently consults to global groups like Intel and Microsoft programs in education communities. Bronwyn likes to have a conversation, so if you have any questions while she is presenting, she will be happy to address them during her session. Everyone, please help me welcome Bronwyn Stuckey to VWBPE.
Well, hi, everyone, and thanks for coming along today. I'm kind of excited to be back in Second Life. It's a while since I've been here, and I have to say I'm relearning a few things, but it's reminding me of some very fond times, and that's probably a big part of what I'm going to talk about today. So as was pointed out, my background is in education. I was a classroom teacher, a curriculum designer. I worked in higher education, and I've worked as a consultant to games and learning projects. I did my PhD in building online communities, building and sustaining online communities. And while I'm calling this talk today Signaling a New Reality, to most of you, what I'm going to say won't be a revelation, but I'm hoping that it will be a reminder of the core values that we prize about virtual worlds and virtual spaces. And we need to hold those core values and interrogate new technologies as they come along. Will they serve our core values? And that's the reminder I probably want to get through most strongly today. So if you're thinking I'm going to talk about Oculus Rift, HoloLens, or Google Cardboard, then that's really not at the core of my talk. Although I'm super excited about the possibilities of these technologies and what they will bring, I think we have to go back to some much more basic concepts to understand what it is virtual worlds and virtual spaces offer to us in terms of reality. And I want to share the perceptual lens I take on reality and where it came from. So I'm hoping to take you on the journey that I've made over those probably all of 10, 15 years in this space. So the first thing I want to say is that I don't believe that we have this dichotomy, real or virtual. And I'm that annoying person at a lot of events who will correct people who say real and virtual because the line of what's real is very blurred, and it's not the boundary people want to present. And that dichotomy is, I think, very troublesome. And we need to, at best, it's distracting to what we need to do, and at worst, it's unproductive. And so I hope in this talk that I can convince you that, we may have to think a new real and stop calling things real and virtual. And I think that's a very important point. I was at a talk 2 days ago here in Sydney by David Suzuki, and he said, the change we need to make is not technology, it's not science, it's our perceptual lens. And I think that's very important in education too. It's our perceptual lens on things that will make the difference. And I just want to point out some of the things that have been influential to my perceptual lens. And those of you in the audience here who might know me, you know I'm all about community and identity, and those are the things that I think shape some of our best experiences. So I want to ask you to think for a second what you consider powerful learning. And in amongst the transcript, if I can catch it, I'd love you to put just a few words to describe what you think is powerful learning. So add to the chat your thoughts on powerful learning. What is it? What does it look like? How would you recognize it? So I'm asking you to throw your idea into the chat. Engagement, constructivist and constructionist, two words that warm my heart. Learning that changed you, fabulous. Where learners are affected emotionally, yes, affect is really important. Learning by doing, memorable. Something that's worth solving, impacts emotions, a personal journey of discovery. Making mistakes in a world and learning from it, experiential. Participatory. Make us grow in our actions as well. Absolutely fabulous. Well, there you go. We can all go home now because I think you've pretty much given my talk. And bravo to all of you. That's wonderful. Because it is all of those things, I think, in powerful learning. And no matter what age the learners you engage with are, those are all really important points. So you can give yourselves a pat on the back for that because you already know some of what I'm going to say. But I hope I can show you some examples that will reinforce some of those points. So powerful learning to me is socially constructed. I think the most powerful experiences in my learning, in my professional learning, have all been socially constructed. The things that really influenced me and, as you've said, changed how you thought, that took me on a journey, have all been socially constructed. And I want to show you where some of those are. And they're not most recent events. I want to take you back to where I think some of the most powerful experiences happened. And I wanted to give a shout out here to a project called Tapped In. And you can applaud if you remember the Tapped In community space. It was an SRI project, and it was headed up by Mark Schlager, Judy Fusco, and it was hosted and facilitated by the amazing BJ Bergquist. And it was a community space for teachers. It was a text-driven space, but it was designed to be a conference center for professional dialogue that would take educators and engage them in lifelong career development. It was designed to be a virtual place, albeit basically text-based. It really did feel like you had arrived somewhere when you went there. And there were some very powerful points to why that was. It was a very welcoming space, and I mentioned BJ because I think she was the facilitator extraordinaire in an online community space. She greeted everyone, and everyone tried to be like her. So everyone emulated her very positive and generous spirit, and that's the tone and the modality that the space operated on. So the norms were very positive. Everyone felt like they belonged in this virtual space, and that was one of the communities that I studied for my PhD. It's now passed on, but the lessons learned and the people who left that space to then go on and build and cultivate community in their own workplaces and in line is immeasurable. So its influence has been massive. And I have colleagues that I've met there and stayed friends with for many, many years, 10, 12 years in that or more in that space. And it began in 1997. So we're not talking about a new technology that existed yesterday. You really did feel like you had arrived somewhere that was of great value to you. I want to give a shout out to 3 other spaces closer to home, and some of you in the audience that I recognize will know these 3 spaces. And they came after Tapped In, but they were Second Life spaces that were massively influential on my thinking about what it means to be real or virtual. So the first of those is Jo Cadia, and Jo may be in the audience or online. I know I've seen her about earlier this morning. And the second is Terra Incognita, which Lindy McCune, now Orwin, developed and managed. And the third is Atlantis Rising with the amazing Bernardine Porter. And the reason I cite these three places as professional spaces, again, they exemplified that arrival. You had arrived in a place, you felt like you had been somewhere, you had gone somewhere. And there were real relationships. The professional learning we did in those spaces was absolutely real. I learned a great deal about online mentoring, coaching, facilitation, and support in those spaces from the people in them. And there was something about each of the facilitators in those space, that's Jo, Lindy, and Bernardine, again, like BJ, that people wanted to emulate them, to be like them, and be as open and generous. And there's something about virtual worlds and virtual communities that engenders a spirit of generosity I don't see in a lot of other places. And it's that added sense that you are together somewhere in space and time. And I think that's absolutely very real. I think one of the things I also learned in that space was to stop saying digital citizenship, because citizenship is something we need to embody everywhere we inhabit. And these spaces, like the physical spaces we inhabit, require us to demonstrate good citizenship and to be thoughtful and treat people the way we want to be treated. And that was absolutely something that most of the people who were in there embodied. And I know I give a shout out to the Isti Islands as well, and the docents that worked in on roster in those spaces were absolutely brilliant. Because you never arrived at Isti Island without someone to greet you and ask you if you were okay, and like BJ, to escort you to where you might need to be or help you. And I know when I was reacquainting myself with Second Life earlier in the week, there was someone who jumped online who was there for the very first time. And it all came back to me. I spent time with that person talking about what was happening in here over the conference. And she asked about my clothes. So I gave her some clothing to play with, some fluffy bunny slippers. And my collection is not very expansive. And I want to give a shout out there to Chimera, who helped me do my shopping in the early days and get myself presentation ready for the first presentation I ever gave in Second Life. So to Liz Dorland, who is another brilliant exponent of making the virtual world real. And so these are absolutely real environments. I've traveled across the world to meet the people I knew in Second Life. The relationships we built there were real. The amazing Peggy Sheehy, I went to visit her and she wasn't able to come home, so she messaged me in Second Life and told me where the key was to her home, and I rocked up, stayed a couple of days with her, never having physically met her, but absolutely knowing that I knew her and I knew and I trusted her, and our relationship was very real. So I think there are very many elements in what we do in the so-called virtual world that have to be questioned in terms of how virtual they really are. So I want to move forward in time because those are the influential historical influences. But let's jump forward a little bit in time to something that influenced me and someone I think is really amazing. And I'm trying to give a shout out in each of these examples to the key people who were involved with them. So you can go follow them, find them, hunt them down, learn about them. And the Velvet Throne is a project run by Natalie Denmead, who is at Moodle Muse online. And she works in the TAFE, which is Technical and Further Education here in Australia, in a rural town, and she teaches media studies. And she created a whole virtual gamification for her students to encourage them to be responsible, because these are not school-age students, but they're people who've not had a lot of success in learning, and they're also likely to rock up a bit late to class and take things a little laissez-faire. So in order to give them a reason to collaborate, a reason to be part of a group, a reason to develop their own reputation and be proud of it, and to feel a sense of responsibility to others, she created this project with houses, and it's based on, as you might imagine, as it looks, guilds and game elements, a little Game of Thrones-esque, but it gave the students a real reason to get excited about learning, to turn up on time, because if everyone in your group was there on time, there were points to be earned. There was a major prize at the end, but the students didn't know that until the end, because Natalie had negotiated that over the course and put in for a grant, and she's very clever at finding solutions. And the students that won this project actually got to go to the Weta Studios in New Zealand and have a look at how real animation, real media is developed. And that's really brilliant work. It's all real. The game structure, or the game wrapper that she put around it, was a virtual experience, but the learning the learners did was absolutely real. And I want to further that discussion a little bit with something that happened very recently this week, actually 2 weeks ago. Ewan McIntosh of Notosh from the UK posted this on Facebook, that he had just run a game of Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes with a group of educators at a conference. And it started up a large discussion about why are we wasting our time, in precious professional development time, in fantasy experiences? Aren't there better things teachers could have been doing with their time? And it was very much my take on that the collaboration these people did in this game was absolutely real. The sense of pressure in the experience was real, because what happens is one of you is looking at a bomb, and the rest of the group is looking at the manual to defuse the bomb. Now, the people with the manual can't see the bomb, and the person with the bomb doesn't have the manual. And so there's a whole lot of dialogue. People need to keep talking to come to the space where they can understand what needs to happen to defuse the bomb. It's a great experience, can be played as a small group or a larger group. And the criticism there was, well, why would we bring this kind of virtual fantasy experience, which is maybe a party game, into a professional learning experience? And I think if you ask the people who were playing that game in that session, there was a real collaboration. There was a real sense of urgency. There was a real sense of importance. There was a real sense that you were needed to solve the problem. And I think that's another really fantastic example. And if you haven't played it, it's a great game to go and get. So the next one I want to tell you about, I discovered at the Serious Play conference. So giving a shout out for that, which is in North Carolina this year. And there's a lot of really fantastic work happening and showcased in the Serious Play conference. Now, this Verbella is a really interesting space developed in Unity. And it brings together psychometrics and a whole lot of other very serious sciences into concepts of team building. Originally, its work was designed to promote virtual teams, so people working in distributed teams around the world, because more and more companies are having to put people together who are not co-located. But it's gone on to have implementations in many other spaces for team building. It's really worth having a look at if you haven't seen it. And in terms of workplace learning, there's a lot of really good social science has gone into the back of it to collect great data about people's engagement. But it's used in many cases to test the preparedness of individuals to operate as a team, their reality of operating as a team, and then reviewing their performance as a team. So all of that is exceptionally real, even though it happens in a Unity-built virtual world space. And the team that puts it together is fairly extensive. So it's a big build to bring it all to happen. But whether it's face-to-face or virtual teams, it has big data handling. And I think one of the things our virtual communities that can offer us that is very real is the big data to analyze experience, engagement, performance, all sorts of issues can be analyzed through the data that we have back end of a lot of our virtual spaces. As I said, it has the psychometrics for individual and team engagement. It's a chance to look at a team and see who might be a natural leader, looking for weaknesses in team building, looking for different prejudices people might have. So a whole lot of things can be surfaced out of what is a supposedly virtual experience. A lot of very real information is developed. So I'm powering on. Is there a question anyone would like to ask at this stage? I'm just noticing the transcription, but if you want to jump in and ask a question, please do. Okay, so the next one I want to talk about is an LMS. Well, LMS is kind of dull and dry. Where is Verbella? The URL was on the screen. Sorry, it's verbella.com. So if you want to go and find more or test it, if you just go there, you can have a look. But I think it was California. So different virtual environment is a question. What excited me was this is a Unity build, and while Unity has a lot of promise and is used a great deal in game development, it's far less used in virtual world development. And from what I saw, this was really very exciting. So I want to talk about Sean Young and his team in Canada. Now, Sean's a physics teacher who developed a product called Classcraft. Now, it's a learning management system. And we all know how exciting learning management systems can be. But this one is really fascinating in terms of the narrative and the fantasy that it builds into its activity. It's played in teams of 5 or 6 and for the duration of a school year. It encourages students who might not normally socialize to work together to win the game of school. And the teacher and the class decide what gains XP. So they decide what gains experience points through the teacher side of the interface, through the input side. And it's relevant to students because there are risks and rewards that are real. So there's real risk and reward for their engagement in the space. And I've seen this develop over time. It does have AAA designers working on it. So the game product is very finessed, but it comes from educators. So I think it's very exciting. It's a beautiful meld of what game designers meeting up with professional educators can develop. So the next screen shows you one of the tasks in the space. So there's a punishment here that the system has suggested. You've done something wrong, you've created some misdemeanor, and now you have to hand in the next assignment a day early. But that's the system's recommendation. Your team has to vote on whether that's appropriate or not. So it's building discussion, relationships, thinking about the proportionality of things. You know, is this a fair loss of status or a fair reward for the activity you've created in the class. So this is a very exciting product, but I want us to talk about the last thing that I think is the most exciting part of that. And that's the way that using Classcraft has the potential to change the roles in a class. So because it is the game that offers rewards and punishments and that speaks to you about your progress and that chides you along through the system and your team members, it creates a new role for the teacher. So all of a sudden, it's not the teacher who's in the management role in the behavior management. It's the teacher who now gets to be your co-learner, your coach, the person you turn to when you need assistance, your mentor. It's less about managing children in a classroom. And I think that's a very exciting, real change that something as virtual as this learning management system can herald in a classroom. And I want to say also that, I'm just getting a message from a Unity developer saying there's a fantastic deal for the month of March on asset stores for developing online communities in a website. Thanks, Day Miami. That's brilliant. Great to know. I'm a big fan of Unity. And you might like to follow up there if that interests you. Okay, so this changing role is really interesting, and I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about Quest Atlantis, but I want to give a shout out here to Gord Holden, who's a teacher in Canada, who worked in the Quest Atlantis virtual world and in a similar way managed to change the role of the teacher through investing himself in the virtuality of the game. And so he created a role called the previewer, to whom your student work was sent. And the previewer had a whole backstory. She'd been an editor in a newspaper, and she was home with children. She was a single parent, and she was working for Quest Atlantis to preview work before it got sent on to the Atlantean Council. And she reviewed your work and sent it back to you. Now, what God found was that she could be really tough because she was an editor. So she could be very demanding about sending students back. And they were very happily making 2, 3, 4 drafts of their work to get it past the previewer. Now, he did his job so darned well that his parents said to him, we love Quest Atlantis, and, we know what the previewer does, but what do? You don't seem to be doing very much. So he'd done his job so well that even the parents had engaged in the narrative of the experience. So how real is that? I think that's just amazing. And it created a new role for him because the kids would come to him and say, the previewer said this, that my language isn't up to scratch. Can you have a look at it and tell me what you think? So now the teacher is your counselor, not the police on your work. And I thought that was really a very compelling story to tell. So changing roles is a really vital part of the reality that we can see in virtual experiences. Okay, so they're socially constructed. They're also empowering. And I saw that in a lot of the language that you suggested about how it helped you to make a change. And I want to think about how virtual worlds or virtual spaces are empowering in that they are helping us to build imagination, capacity, agency, identity, responsibility, civic efficacy, and empathy. And all of those are very real. And all of those, there is evidence in the research, will transfer out from virtual world experiences. So the first of those is Quest Atlantis. And Quest Atlantis, the project that I was involved with for some 11 years, was a virtual world game hosted globally around the world. And at its closure, I think we had 55,000 student accounts, and it was played in a matter of 30 countries around the world. So from Alaska to Hawaii and from Croatia to New Zealand, there were schools engaged in this virtual world game. And what was very exciting about that, and it's the brainchild of Professor Sasha Barab, who was then at Indiana University and now heads up the Center for Games and Impact at Arizona State University. But it was a social space for learning for students aged in the school years 4 to 8. It was very exciting learning. There was curriculum in the world, and then there were spaces for student development and student-led design, student-led lessons. And I want to talk about a piece of research that Anna Arici Barab did on the Quest Atlantis world. So we had a world there which was a virtual rainforest park, a national park, and there were a number of stakeholders invested in that park, and there was a serious environmental issue that was impacting the park. And it was threatened that the park could close if this issue was not resolved. But the issue had to be resolved to the satisfaction of all the stakeholders. So it was socioeconomics, not just science. So it was socioeconomic scientific inquiry. And Anna ran some research where the students did the study in the virtual world with their companions, and did a similar study in online resources with a great teacher. So it wasn't dumbed down to be one of those very poor comparison studies, but it was a great teacher with great resources teaching in a more conventional fashion. And looking at the students' knowledge in pre and post tests, they were about the same. There wasn't a significant difference in the knowledge students gained about the rainforest, about the national park, about water quality issues, because they did do scientific testing and they learnt about pH and turbidity and a whole lot of water quality science. But what was compelling was the students in the virtual world showed that they felt they'd been to a rainforest. And they cared much more about the rainforest space in the world because they felt they had been there. So they developed a positive disposition to preserving an ecosystem, and they cared about them. So in the close of that mission, if teachers took it to that point, they were asked to look for a local environmental issue and take up the cause of that issue. So there was an attempt to take that passion out into the physical space around them. But the students' caring and their sense of having traveled to the national park rainforest was very real. And it impacted their desires, their want to help change the world. So that's very exciting, and that's very real for those students. And I want to talk about student reality in my next slide. This TED Talk is a little old because it was 2012 when David gave his TED Talk. And he was one of Gord's students in Canada in a online school, virtual school. An absolutely brilliant student. But in this TED Talk, he talks about 21st century learning, not as that slide says, at first century learning. And he's very articulate about what it was all about. But he describes his day as starting at home when he logs onto a virtual world where he solves problems along with teams of other kids around the world. On most days, his school day is bookended with a workout in the morning and a hockey game or swimming in the afternoon. And for fun, he teaches robotics at a local after-school program. Now, in that TED Talk, he describes me as his teacher because we worked in a space in Quest Atlantis called the Student Congress, where the students were designing a world for students, by students. And he considered me as much his teacher as someone he could see physically next to him or in a classroom, his parents who assisted in his teaching, or Gord, who was also online with him. And I would commend you to go and have a look at that TED Talk because it's a fascinating thing that people want to paint those who excel online in virtual spaces as being in derogatory ways, to paint them as nerdy little people in a basement who don't see sunlight. And this child's got it all. He plays music, he plays sport, he does robotics, he volunteers at the school, but he knows this is all real. This is all real learning, whether it happens online or it happens at the local school where he's supporting other kids. Now, World of Warcraft is another interesting space for empowerment. And the World of Warcraft in Schools program is a beautiful story. It's probably not scaled to the largest numbers that other projects may have done, but what's happened in World of Warcraft in school has been massively powerful. And a shout out here to Lucas Gillespie in North Carolina, Peggy Sheehy in New York, and Craig Lawson also in North Carolina, who were the founders of this project. And so bringing an off-the-shelf massively multiplayer online role-play game into classrooms is pretty edgy stuff. And they've proven that a lot of beautiful learning happens in those spaces. Very much as Peggy described it to me once, that she found for her learners, it was helping some of her students find their tribe. And realizing their capacity for leadership, mentoring, coaching, and excellence. So they're not necessarily concerned so much with the missions in World of Warcraft, but with building a layer of their own educational missions that are enacted in World of Warcraft. That virtuality in the game is essential to what they're trying to do. So building new social ties in the space free from the class cliques or hierarchies is very important. And a lot of people, Marianne Malmstrom has found this with a lot of her virtual world games, that once people get into the virtual world, they forget whether they're a third grader or an eighth grader. They forget whether that's someone they don't usually hang out with. Avatars and new identities in the virtual world actually help kids overcome a lot of the stigma of school cliques. And they don't, in a lot of the work here, students said they didn't see themselves as good writers, and what the project set out to do was to show that kids just didn't have exciting stuff to write about. And so a lot of the written work that comes out of the WOW in Schools project is phenomenal, really beautiful work. And the academic writing that the children have produced is phenomenal. And that hails also to the work of Constance Steinkuhler, who looked at World of Warcraft as well, and looked at students who declared themselves as not good writers, and then looked at the blogs and discussion spaces that surrounded their play in World of Warcraft and how eloquently and committed they were to writing in those spaces. So it's about an audience, an authentic audience for learning, and that's very real. Okay, so I want to talk now about the American Museum of Natural History, and shout out there to the amazing Barry Joseph, who's working on a brilliant project. Oops, sorry, called, sorry, I just lost my place. Micro ranges. So what this is augmented reality, for sure, but played out inside the museum. So students are going off on quests and missions with a viewer and a token that allows them to flesh out their learning and the challenges as they move through the museum. And that's very exciting. It's very self-directed. They're taking themselves on this journey with assistance, and it's also played out in the company of others. And that's another really important, empowering point as they move through the museum. One of the things I really love about Barry's work in the museum, in this project and many others, is that he works in participatory design with students. So a lot of the projects that the museum is dealing with online and in the space of the museum, the ideas are generated by kids and they work on those projects. So that's really, really exciting stuff. And I recommend you go and have a look at the work Barry's doing. He was with Global Kids. There's another great story about empowerment in real and virtual spaces. Okay, so next up, I want to think about impactful. And I saw that in a lot of the comments that you made. And this is really the big one for me, being impactful. Because we live in a world where the environment's going down the toilet, everything on the news seems doom and gloom, and we really can't afford our students to come to their adult lives as feeling unempowered, feeling that they can't make a difference in the world. So developing projects, real and virtual, that are impactful is a vital part of what we're trying to do. And I want to show you a couple of those that I think are stellar. Now, this first one is block by block. And the call out here is to Pontus Westerberg, who is the Digital Project Officer for UN Habitat, and to Vu Bui, who is the Chief Operations Officer for Mojang. And so this is the UN Habitat building new city environments using Minecraft in places like Kenya, Nepal, and Haiti. And this is really exciting stuff. What happens is it's a bit like a LAN party. A lot of learners get together. Now, who are those learners? Well, they're the teenagers and kids who might know how to use Minecraft or will quickly learn how to. They're the city elders. They're the parents, the grandparents. They're the people who have influence. And what they come together to do is to redesign a hub of the town or the city, because there's a lot of evidence of bringing people back into the heart of environments actually helps accelerate change. So reinvigorating spaces so that people want to come into them and be part of them is going to accelerate betterment for everyone. And so they host these large groups. Sometimes I believe Pontus set up to 300 people coming together in a huge hall or a number of spaces, and they have a map from the area that they're going to work on, and they redesign in teams. They work on redesigning that area. And that would be very exciting if that's where they stopped. But they don't stop there. What happens is that the chosen design, whatever they reach consensus about, becomes an output for architects who then draw up architectural plans to work on that part of the city to the map that people have wanted. And so what it is, it's Minecraft's proved to be an effective way for people to visualize urban planning without an architectural background. And they can all have a say, from the youngest members of the community through to the most senior elders of the group. And again, that's very real. That output to the physical world and the impact on the physical world is stellar. And I would love to see many, many more projects like that that really have demonstrable impact. But wait, I do have another one. And this project hails from the amazing Derek Robertson at the University of Dundee in Scotland. And the project is called On the Waterfront. And the city is doing a redevelopment of its waterfront. And they called, Derek put in a proposal to have the students work on that redesign using Minecraft. And you can see from the pictures that they worked in sketches, they then built 3D representations, and then they built in world. And there was a process, this is across a number of schools. They developed a lot of designs, and they set up an expo to pitch their designs to the city elders of Dundee and to explain why they thought certain things should be certain places and what was the advantage of that, to walk those city elders through the city in their Minecraft version. And they had canvassed people in the city on their designs to get, support for their designs. So that's children acting as architects, as urban planners in a real environment, their city, the place they know intimately, the place they visit with their families. And this is such a sweet and beautiful project. And Derek does brilliant work and brilliant research. So I would encourage you to have a look at what he's doing. Okay, also impactful in a very different way is the Quest to Teach program. Now, this comes out of Arizona State University Center for Games and Impact, and is managed and designed by Dr. Anna Ricci Barab. Now, the program is a sequence of games, 4 games, played in a virtual environment as a teacher, and they focus on important aspects of being a teacher. They're used in the pre-service program, and in Arizona, the students are in schools in the whole 4th year of their program. So they're using these games while they're actually in situ in a school. So as it were, they're playing these virtual things while they're in the, and I'm using air quotes here, real world of teaching. And I had the privilege of being in some of the meetings they were having back on campus talking about their play. And what was fascinating about these games, and you can see there from the slide that they look at pursuit of professionalism and on the right track. These are, 4 different units looking at what it means to be a professional educator. And that first one, some very simple things about dressing professionally and being on time and how to speak to teachers and students and parents and a whole lot of those issues. And as I said, I had the privilege of listening to some dialogue students had, and they were talking about how fantastic this was to be doing while they were in situ in schools. They had had a taste of it the previous year, and they said, well, it was really too far removed. But now that they're in schools, a lot of it made so much sense to them as they were going about their day-to-day wanting to be a professional educator. And so playing while they were in situ in schools was massively powerful and made these experiences so much more real for them. It's a really beautiful program, and Anna is looking at partnerships around the world of other pre-service programs that might want to take this up. And I know that the Centre has looked at applying the same kind of architecture to other domains where particular practices may be need to be strengthened. So in healthcare and finance. So really exciting stuff. It's fun, it's engaging, it's modern, but it's very real. And students are developing authentic practice, so it's steeped in that. They're looking at why they want to build an identity as a professional. Why is that important? And it's making the real world inside and outside the classroom. So I kind of want to wrap up on that, and I'm just going to end with this last slide and think, is this the perceptual lens you would prefer to see us using as we go forward? And I just love this image, but I'm not trying to denigrate virtual tools that are coming along. I think they're fantastic, but I think we need to remember that, the powerful learning is social, it's empowering. It's the stuff that we do together, and how much we can help make these virtual experiences eke out into that is what I really want to follow up on. That's actually an iPad on a virtual space, and it's actually a real picture someone recommending you should do. And I think it's kind of tragic looking. But I love Oculus Rift. I love the possibility it's going to have for us. But how can we help that build better community, better empowerment, better agency for our learners, better impact in the physical world? So we really have to stop talking about real or virtual. And as I said, I'm the person who jumps up every time I hear that and say, well, look, if we have to we have to have a dichotomy, or we have to separate. Let's do physical and virtual. But I don't really know that we really need that. The line that of what is real is so blurred. Perhaps it's all real. And our goals just need to be audacious. Call it all real. Put it all in the same bucket and make it work for the learning we want to encourage. So as we move into these new technologies and portals to the virtual, we have to remember what makes learning real. And so that's me. And I'm happy to take questions from everyone. Or if you have an example you'd like to cite, that would be brilliant as well. And I know there's a wealth of talent in this audience who could share their ideas.
We only have a couple of minutes for Bronwyn, so if you have any questions for her before we get on to our next speaker, but that was amazing. Thank you, Bronwyn, for being with us today.
I have many, many more examples I could cite, but I wanted to present some of the educators I admire immensely and the people who've been influential on my perceptual lens.
I think you blew them away, Bron. Oh, there's a question right there for you.
How important is persistence in virtual environments? I think I'd want to know what your take is on the word persistence. If you've got it right, it lasts a long time, a virtual space, but things come and go. Things have met their needs. Tapped in, the technology ran over it, and people moved to other spaces. But the lessons learned out of that and the expectations people then had and took into the learning environments they built were superb. So the experience, even if it wanes and leaves, and I'm kind of hoping we're seeing a resurgence in Second Life, because coming back in here in these last few days has really, as I said, reminded me of what have been some of the greatest influences on my learning as a professional educator and the way I view powerful learning. But persistence, I'm not sure what you mean there.
I'm wondering if he was talking about the persistence of the environment to remain unchanged, perhaps, as opposed to other environments that reset.
Yes. Well, I think that's very important. I think students, learners having agency, being able to build, to design is the gold standard for me. It's much more about students taking the lead, students as participatory designers in projects, and I think a lot of that's very important. Will the tools stick around? Well, Quest Atlantis was around for 12 years. It was grant funded. But again, all the students that learnt in that, and I have amazing letters from parents, they moved into places like Minecraft. They went into Unity. They're in game design in other products. So, they're working in Project Spark or other places. They found places to take their learning. They didn't need to be trapped in a particular tool. So I think as long as we're offering students a diversity of tools and meeting their ongoing needs, I think that's great. A lot of people worried about investing in building in Second Life, and Second Life would go away. And I know that was an issue. And a lot of, in Australia, OpenSim is very popular. As I said, as is Minecraft and Unity. But I don't see any of those tools actually going away in the near future.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn.
How can we overcome the barriers students have experiencing to use virtual environments, including teacher resistance, lack of technology, etc.? I don't think we have time because you need to move to, there's another session, but I'd be very happy to take that question or any of your questions on chat. You have my contacts there, and if I can, I'll get back to you with a private message. I'll copy away the chat so that I can answer those questions. So yeah, the $64 question, it's a big one, overcoming teacher resistance. But I have a few ideas for that.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn, for your support and your attendance. Our first keynote of the conference. You all, please help me give her our appreciation for her being here. Thank you so much, Bronwyn. It was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. We hope you can join us again another time.
Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everybody for showing up tonight. Great. Bravo. Bravo to you.